Welcome to the Eden Podcast, where we think again about the Bible on women and men, and we start with the correct understanding of what happened in the Garden of Eden, back in the beginning. Today we'll be hearing from Bruce C.E. Fleming. He's a former academic dean and professor of practical theology. The work of the TRU 316 Foundation is based on the research of Dr. Joy Fleming, who wrote the book Man and Woman in Biblical Unity, Theology from Genesis 2 to 3. Listeners like you are joining us as members of the TRU 316 Foundation and support the work to true the verse of Genesis 3:16 and the 7 key passages on women and men. It turns out, when Genesis 3:16 becomes clear, all the other passages become clear too. You can learn more at our website, tru316.com. That's TRU316.com. And at the end of this episode, we'll tell you about a special gift we have for new members. And now, enjoy today's episode of the Eden Podcast.
Have you heard of TED Talks? We've been recording TRU Talks for you from people who have been touched by the TRU 316 message of joy in Eden. Our first TRU Talks are from Brian Nystrom, Bev Nyberg, and Mike Davis. These TRU Talks are part of our celebration of the launch of the TRU 316 Foundation. We'd love to have you become a TRU partner to help true the verse of Genesis 3:16. Simply go to tru316.com/member. And now, let's listen to this TRU Talk.
I'm Dr. Beverly Nyberg, and just after I graduated from Trinity College, I took off for a 2-year short term in what was then Zaire, and that was what set the foundation for the rest of my professional career, for my life, to be involved in international work. After I returned from my 2-year stint, I started going back to seminary, and that's where I met Bruce and Joy Fleming. That was a part of my seminary experience. I then went on to eventually go career with the Evangelical Free Church for several years, for a decade, over a decade. And then they asked me to head up the Free Church short-term mission program, which I did for several years. After doing that, I went on for my doctorate at George Washington University in DC and ended up staying there working for the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And I was with the State Department. I was responsible for overseeing the programs that the U.S. government sponsored for children affected by HIV/AIDS. But it all started because of my short-term stint in the Congo, in Zaire. I first learned about, it wasn't called TRU 316 at the time, but Bruce and Joy were teaching at FATEB, the French Evangelical Seminary in Bangui, and I was up there for a visit. And Joy was working on her dissertation, which was on this general passage, Genesis 2 and 3. And when Joy excitingly, was sharing with what she was learning, I had multiple reactions. One was shock. It was like, why didn't we know this before? I grew up in the church. I've been to seminary. Why don't we know this? The second was relief. I felt like, and almost disbelief. Could I really be myself? Instead of having to kind of always put myself down and be under a man. And it was also amazement. Could I really be free to be myself and really use what I felt were the God-given gifts and desires, interests that I had, that up to that point had been somewhat, quite a bit. To me, it felt like they were saying I couldn't use because that the Bible was saying I couldn't use it because I was a woman. And I had and still have a very high view of Scripture, and I wanted to obey Scripture. So what do I do with all this? So when I was hearing this from what Joy was saying and looking at the Scriptures with her and and then continued on studying, read her synopsis of her dissertation, read some of Bruce's books, and continued to study these passages throughout Scripture. I've just been continued to work through that sense of permission to be who God created me to be, and that desire to be who I feel God created me to be. I feel this is really, really important for many reasons. Well, I'll just cite three. One is learning this really saved my relationship with God. I mean, it certainly had. So I was pretty angry with God. And this, I hadn't even realized how angry I was till I was meeting with a spiritual director I had and said, "You are really angry with God." Like, yeah, that's true. I am. Because I thought it was kind of a cruel joke. Why would he give me gifts and desires and aptitudes that women weren't supposed to have? And so it was like, could I really trust that God loved me as a woman and accepted me and valued me? It was just, and that it was just kind of amazing. And then I believe it's also important for the effectiveness of the church. Half the church are women. And so it's just so sad to think that many of those women aren't fully using the gifts that God has given them and aren't being a part of the body as they need to be for the church to be totally effective. And thirdly, I think it's important for our witness to the world. I was at a dinner with a group of university women on Monday night, and one woman almost, I don't even know where this came from, but just throughout, she said, every religion that I can think of has a problem with women. And I started to respond to her just to say that, well, yes, that seems to be true, but I don't think that's what God really meant for it to be like. And I just know that our witness to the world is hindered by many people's belief of how women are and who they are and how they should be treated within the Christian church. And I don't believe that is what God wanted or intended. That is true from the foundation in Genesis 3:16 and the early chapters of Genesis. It's also a mandate that we, it's not, some people I think fear that, oh, you're just becoming liberal, believing that women are equal with men. And it's like, no, we're getting closer to the heart of God. We're all made in the image of God, both male and female. God created us. And we are part of God's image. And God cannot be truly reflected to the world without both male and female reflecting that image. So I'm just really thankful for the work that both Joy and Bruce have done on these passages that has helped to restore people's faith in God, has been able to help the church be more effective and be a better witness to the world.
Thanks for listening to the Eden Podcast, brought to you by the members of the TRU 316 Foundation. Research into the Old and New Testaments by Dr. Joy Fleming and Reverend Bruce C.E. Fleming forms the base of all our work. Joy is a former Old Testament professor and is a practicing licensed psychologist. Bruce is the author of the Eden book series, which starts with Book 1, the Book of Eden, Genesis 2-3. We invite you to become a donor member of the TRU 316 Foundation, as together we seek to true the verse of Genesis 3:16 and related passages. When you become a member, we'll send you an autographed copy of the Book of Eden. Sign up today by going to tru316.com/member. That's TRU316.com/member.